Peoves Cyrillic letter 456, DOML Nya Gemini at 400 feet below the surface of the ocean. The water exerts a pressure of nearly 180 pounds on every square inch of the hull. Outside is absolute darkness and freezing temperatures. Inside is a multi-billion-dollar cylinder of high-yield steel, carrying a nuclear reactor, dozens of advanced torpedoes, and 130 exhausted human beings. This machine is an apex predator, capable of outrunning surface ships and remaining submerged for months at a time. It is a masterpiece of modern engineering. But the reality of living inside this machine is shockingly primitive. The men and women operating this vessel are currently breathing air manufactured from seawater. They are sleeping in aluminum pans stacked 3 high in a room that smells like industrial chemicals and unwashed laundry. They are eating meals prepared from dehydrated powder because the fresh food ran out weeks ago. And if a single valve is turned in the wrong sequence during a routine trash disposal, the ocean will breach the hull with the force of an explosive charge. Why do people volunteer to live in a steel tube with no sunlight, no internet, and limited oxygen? And more importantly, how do they physically and psychologically survive a 90-day patrol without snapping? In this documentary, we are going to bypass the classified sonar systems and the propulsion plant. We are going to examine the human machinery. You will learn how the crew manages to load 15 tons of food through a hole the size of a manhole cover. We will dissect the strict hierarchy of the galley, the mechanical dangers of flushing a toilet at test depth, the chemistry of the air they breathe, and the psychological weight of total isolation. You will understand why eating a premium steak dinner is often the worst news a submariner can receive. This is the unvarnished logistical reality of life in the silent service. To understand the daily existence of a submariner, you must first understand the architecture of confinement. A fast attack submarine is built for speed, stealth, and lethality. It is not built for cargo, and it is certainly not built for comfort. Before a deployment begins, the boat must take on enough provisions to sustain 130 people for up to 90 days. This requires roughly 15 tons of dry, frozen, and chilled goods. On a surface ship, cranes lower massive pallets directly onto a spacious deck. On a submarine, there are no cargo doors. Every single item, every box of frozen chicken, every bag of flour, every can of coffee must be passed by hand through a 26-inch vertical hatch. This evolution is known as the store's load. It requires the labor of the entire crew. A human chain is formed, stretching from the concrete pier down the vertical ladder through the control room and navigating the narrow, steep stairwells down to the lower decks. For 6 to 8 relentless hours, the crew functions as a biological conveyor belt. The immediate problem is that the submarine's freezers and pantries are simply not large enough to hold 90 days of food. This necessitates a unique and highly uncomfortable storage solution known as the deck load. The crew takes industrial-sized metal tins, known as number 10 cans, filled with vegetables, fruit, and flour, and lays them out tightly across the floors of the lower passageways. They cover these cans with sheets of plywood and rubber non-skid matting. For the first month of a deployment, the crew is literally walking on top of their food supply. The vertical clearance in the hallways, already claustrophobic, is reduced by 6 to 8 inches. Tall sailors must walk with a permanent stoop. As the mission progresses and the food is consumed, the cans are removed and the floor level physically drops. A sailor can accurately track the length of the deployment simply by measuring how much headroom they have in the passageway. The epicenter of morale on a submarine is the galley. It is a stainless steel closet measuring roughly 10 by 15 feet. In this severely restricted space, a team of 3 or 4 culinary specialists must prepare 4 meals a day for the entire crew. That is over 500 meals every 24 hours. The cooking equipment is heavy-duty and bolted directly to the deck. Cooking here requires a constant awareness of the ship's movement. A submarine operates in 3 dimensions. If the commanding officer orders an emergency deep maneuver or a steep ascent, the angle of the deck can suddenly pitch 20 or 30 degrees. Deep fryers are equipped with heavy steel locking lids to prevent boiling oil from becoming a lethal projectile. The cooks learn to brace themselves, wedging their knees against the counters to stay upright while flipping burgers or stirring 80-gallon soup kettles on a severely inclined floor. The food itself is dictated by a rigid timeline known as the fresh cliff. When the submarine leaves the pier, the meals are excellent. For the first 10 to 14 days, the crew enjoys fresh salads, tomatoes, bananas, and fluid milk. This period is the morale peak of the patrol. But logistics dictate reality, and fresh produce decays rapidly in the pressurized environment. By day 15, the fresh cliff arrives. The salad bar vanishes. The bananas turn black and are thrown into the trash disposal. The menu abruptly shifts to frozen and canned ingredients. The fluid milk is replaced by UHT milk. Ultra-high temperature milk is pasteurized at extreme heat and packaged in sterile cardboard bricks. It can sit in a warm storage locker for 6 months without spoiling. Because of the intense heat used in the pasteurization process, the sugars in the milk caramelize. This gives the milk a slightly brown tint and a thick, sweet, cooked flavor. Most sailors refuse to drink it plain, using it only to moisten their dry cereal. As the months drag on, the frozen meat diminishes and the reliance on highly processed food increases. Shell eggs take up too much physical volume and are too fragile to store in bulk, so the cooks transition to liquid egg product poured from cartons. When those cartons run out during the final weeks of a long patrol, they resort to dehydrated egg powder. To make reconstituted powdered eggs palatable, the culinary team relies on heavy seasoning, mixing in excessive amounts of cheese, hot sauce, and bacon grease. This heavy seasoning is not just to mask the taste of preservatives. It is a physiological necessity. The atmospheric pressure inside a submerged submarine is often kept slightly higher than sea level, and the oxygen content is maintained at a lower percentage to mitigate the risk of fire. This artificial atmosphere significantly dulls the human sense of taste and smell. Food that is perfectly seasoned on land tastes bland and flat underwater. To ensure the crew consumes enough calories to sustain their grueling work schedules, submarine food is notoriously high in fat, salt, and carbohydrates. It is designed to punch through the sensory deprivation. Because the submarine operates continuously, the galley never closes. The most critical meal of the day occurs when the rest of the world is asleep. It is called midrats, short for midnight rations. Served from 11 at night until midnight, this meal fuels the night watchstanders, the sonar technicians staring at green screens, the nuclear mechanics monitoring the reactor, the helmsman driving the boat. Midrats is heavily skewed toward greasy comfort food. Deep-fried corn dogs, leftover lasagna mixed with ravioli, tater tots, and thick slices of homemade pizza are standard fare. But midrats is more than just caloric intake. It is the primary social anchor of the crew. In the absence of sunlight and external communication, the mess deck at midnight becomes the center of the submarine's culture. It is where rumors are traded, grievances are aired, and the crushing monotony of the patrol is temporarily relieved. There is, however, one meal that brings a complex wave of anxiety to the mess deck: steak and lobster. In the civilian world, surf and turf is a celebration. On a submarine, it is a highly calculated psychological tool. Because of strict budget constraints, premium proteins like lobster tails are strictly rationed. They are not served randomly. If a sailor walks into the mess deck and sees lobster on the serving line, it almost universally signals impending bad news. Command leadership uses high-value meals to preemptively soften a blow. It usually means the deployment has just been extended by several weeks, or the submarine has been ordered to divert into a high-threat operational area where the stress level will be severe. The lobster tastes like melted butter, but to an experienced submariner, it tastes like a broken promise to go home. If the galley is the engine of morale, the air scrubbers are the engine of survival. Viewers often ask what the inside of a submarine smells like. The answer is a highly specific, pervasive chemical compound called monoethanolamine, or amine for short. When 130 people breathe inside a sealed steel tube, carbon dioxide levels rise rapidly to lethal concentrations. To prevent the crew from suffocating on their own exhalations, the air is continuously pumped through a liquid amine chemical bath. The amine binds to the carbon dioxide, stripping it from the air, and then the chemical is heated to release the CO2, which is pumped overboard into the ocean. This process keeps the crew alive, but the amine liquid emits a distinct heavy vapor. It smells like a combination of dirty gym socks, diesel fuel, and burnt plastic. This odor does not just hang in the air, it permeates every porous surface on the ship. It aggressively bonds to human hair, skin, and fabric. Sailors wear standard-issue blue coveralls, universally known as poopy suits. A sailor will wear the same poopy suit for up to 18 hours a day, sometimes for a week straight due to severe laundry restrictions. The fabric absorbs the sweat, the grease from the engine room, and the heavy vapor of amine. When a deployment ends and a sailor returns to their civilian home, opening their sea bag releases a concentrated cloud of this chemical odor. It is a smell so specific and potent that it instantly identifies them as a member of the submarine service. Wives and husbands of submariners often force them to undress in the garage and immediately wash their uniforms in baking soda to strip the amine out of the fabric. While the air is mechanically filtered, sleep is mechanically enforced. Space on a submarine is the ultimate premium. The enlisted berthing compartment is a dense matrix of sleeping pods stacked 3 high. Each bunk, referred to as a rack, is an aluminum pan measuring approximately 74 inches long, 24 inches wide, and 18 inches high. There is not enough vertical space to sit up. To get into a middle or top rack, a sailor must slide in horizontally, like a tray going into an oven. Beneath the thin mattress is a shallow pan that provides about 4 inches of depth. This represents the entirety of a sailor's personal storage space. Everything they own for a 3-month deployment, underwear, socks, toiletries, hard drives loaded with movies, must fit into this pan. Privacy is provided by a single, thin blue curtain drawn across the opening. When that curtain is shut, naval etiquette dictates that the sailor does not exist. It is their only sanctuary. However, on most fast-attack submarines, the crew complement exceeds the physical number of beds. This mathematical problem is solved by a practice called hot racking. 3 sailors are assigned to share 2 racks. Their lives are dictated by the rotation of the watch schedule. When Sailor A completes their shift and returns to berthing, Sailor B is waking up to go on watch. Sailor A climbs directly into the rack that Sailor B just vacated. The mattress is still physically warm from body heat. This creates a relentless, never-ending cycle of movement within the berthing compartment. It is never dark and it is never quiet. Zippers are always opening, boots are always hitting the deck, and the heavy mechanical thrum of the propulsion shaft provides a constant, vibrating background noise. Hygiene under these conditions is a matter of strict logistical control. A nuclear submarine possesses distillation plants and reverse osmosis units capable of boiling seawater and producing thousands of gallons of fresh, potable water daily. However, the submarine systems demand priority. The nuclear reactor requires ultra-pure makeup water. The steam propulsion plant needs water, and the oxygen generators use electricity to crack water molecules into breathable oxygen and hydrogen. The human crew receives the surplus. This leads to draconian water conservation measures. The Navy shower is a mandatory protocol. A sailor steps into a stainless steel stall and turns the water on for exactly 10 seconds to wet their body. They immediately shut the water off. They apply soap and vigorously scrub in the cold air. They then turn the water back on for no more than 30 to 40 seconds to rinse off the lather. Taking a long, continuous shower, known derisively as a Hollywood shower, is a massive breach of trust. If one sailor drains the hot water tank, the next 5 men in line will be forced to shower in freezing water. On a submarine, official regulations are secondary to peer pressure. A sailor who steals water will be aggressively corrected by their shipmates. The logistics of taking on water are complex, but the logistics of removing waste are highly dangerous. You cannot simply accumulate the garbage and human waste of 130 men for 3 months. It must be ejected from the ship while remaining completely undetected. Solid trash is managed through the Trash Disposal Unit, or TDU. It functions essentially like a vertical torpedo tube pointing straight down through the bottom of the hull. In the galley, metal cans are placed into a hydraulic press and crushed into dense pucks. Food waste is ground into a liquid slurry. Plastic, paper, and non-biodegradable waste are packed into mesh bags and heavily weighted with galvanized steel slugs to ensure they sink rapidly to the ocean floor and do not float to the surface, which would give away the submarine's highly classified position. Operating the TDU is a lethal hazard. The operator must open an inner door, load the weighted trash bags, seal the inner door, flood the tube with seawater to equalize the immense outside pressure, and then open the outer ball valve to let gravity drop the trash into the abyss. If a sailor makes a procedural error and opens the inner door while the outer valve is open to the sea, the ocean will blast upward into the submarine at hundreds of pounds per square inch, instantly flooding the compartment and potentially sinking the ship. Even taking out the garbage is a life-or-death evolution. Human waste carries its own mechanical terrors. The toilets on a submarine flush into massive holding tanks known as sanitary tanks. When these tanks are full, they must be emptied into the ocean. Because the water pressure outside the submarine is massive, the waste cannot simply drain out. The tanks must be pressurized with high-pressure air to force the waste out against the pressure of the deep ocean. This is called blowing the sand tanks. During this procedure, every toilet on the submarine is strictly off-limits. Warning signs are posted, and announcements are made over the ship's intercom. If a sailor ignores the warning and attempts to flush a toilet while the holding tank is pressurized with hundreds of pounds of air, the system will violently backfire. The pressurized raw sewage will explode upward out of the toilet bowl, covering the sailor and the entire bathroom compartment in biological waste. This catastrophic failure is known as blowing inboard. The sailor responsible is universally despised, as they are usually the one forced to clean the ceiling with a toothbrush while the entire ship mocks their failure. The physical deprivations of submarine life are severe, but the psychological toll is often heavier. A submarine is a sensory deprivation chamber. There are no windows. There is no day or night, only the artificial glow of fluorescent tubes. The only way to know the weather on the surface is to look at a depth gauge. If the ship is rolling at 200 feet, there is a massive storm above. The primary weapon of a submarine is stealth, and stealth requires absolute radio silence. A deployed submarine does not transmit data. It does not send emails. It does not connect to the internet. It only receives information via very low-frequency radio waves that penetrate the ocean water. For the crew, this means total isolation from the outside world. Communication with families is limited to family grams. These are one-way, text-only messages originating from home, strictly limited to 40 words or less. They are heavily screened by the submarine's command leadership. If a tragedy occurs back home, a death in the family, a severe financial crisis, a serious medical diagnosis, the commanding officer has the authority to redact that information and withhold it from the sailor. The rationale is cold but necessary. A sailor operating a nuclear reactor or steering a multi-billion-dollar warship cannot afford to be psychologically compromised by grief they are entirely powerless to address. This creates a state of suspended reality. A crew will submerge in the dead of winter and surface in the heat of spring. They miss Super Bowls, elections, global crises, and the births of their own children. They exist in a vacuum of steel and routine, drilling constantly for fires, flooding, and combat, while the world moves on without them. When the mission finally concludes, the return to the surface is a physiological shock. The commanding officer will often order an emergency blow as a final drill. High-pressure air is blasted into the ballast tanks, violently expelling thousands of tons of water. The massive submarine pitches upward at a severe angle and rockets toward the surface, breaching the waves like a breaching whale before slamming back down onto the ocean. When the main hatch is finally cracked open, the sensory